Hello, Dana Stevens here from Paterson, New Jersey. I play saxophone and I am a curious thinker.
And Peter Stoltzman, living in Denver, Colorado. I play the piano, and curious. I aspire to be curious. I aspire to be more curious than I am.
And Lucas Vesley, located in Northern California. I am quite curious and inquisitive, I think. I'm always aspiring to learn more. So thank you, everyone. And we have, as a guest, Kamrin.
Yeah, indeed. This is Kamrin Ortiz from Antioch, California, and I'm a saxophonist. And I find that I am too curious about most subjects. There's too much time and not enough. There's too many topics and not enough time.
I do know. So Kamrin, tell us tell us a little bit about yourself, man. Like what your story is with your own kind of life background, a little bit in jazz.
Yeah, absolutely. So my dad was a really heavy record collector. I know I'm not starting it out got to start it out a little early. Right. So my dad is a huge record collector, collecting like 45s, 78s predominantly, about 1,000 or so 45s, maybe 6,000 to 8,000 78s, and maybe 4,000 to 6,000 LPs, and ranging from like NWA, AC/DC, like Count Basie and Milt Jackson. And so there's just like a wide range of music, and we were able to pick from any one of those. And so I heard those at a very young age, and I didn't sleep very well as a child. And my dad always used to put me to sleep with Coleman Hawkins and Coltrane, the Impulse album, like every night. And then like the Lester Young with Billie Holiday sessions, like 1937, 1938. And so I heard those probably until I was about 12, almost every night. And I think that really had like a profound impact, because like at a young age, like just like absorbing that every night. I mean, I thought maybe I'd get bored with it, but I fell asleep, and like I just like absorbed that over time. And my sisters were both musicians, and I really wanted to play music by the time I was 6 years old, because my dad held musicians as like a high regard. And to be musically inclined was kind of like the ultimate like paradigm, or what would you call it? Like, it was just like, we thought like, growing up, you have like these different heroes, but my dad was like, no, like the real heroes are like Desi Arnaz, Cab Calloway, like Louis Armstrong, like those are people to look up to. He's like, they really did something musically.
Your dad is rad.
Yeah, no, for sure. And but my sisters hadn't really they'd gotten to music a little bit, and they're pretty good. And I really wanted to play the drums, like Gene Krupa. I was like really insisted on playing the drums. My sister was a drummer, and she was like, don't play the drums or whatever. So my parents were not going to buy me an instrument, because they bought both my sisters instruments. And by the time they got to high school, they both dropped out, and we had all this musical equipment. And they're like, well, you have the trumpet, or you have the guitar, or the drums. And I'm like, I don't feel like any of those are my voice. Like, I just don't think that's it. I was like, and so by the time I got into middle school, I had finally an opportunity to pick up a mouthpiece for the tenor saxophone, and I was extremely short. I actually couldn't hold it, so I had to like hold it really awkwardly, which is when I seen like those pictures of Lester Young, and I was like, oh, maybe he was too short to hold it, so maybe like that's how it works. And so I held it in a really bad angle for about 2 years, and I had like a really bad neck ache, but I had a hell of a time. I should have started on alto, and the teacher was like, you got to play alto. I was like, yeah, but Coleman Hawkins didn't play alto. So, and I didn't know this at the time that they played other instruments, but I was like, no, it's either tenor or I'm quitting. I was like, that's it. And so, and that's just, I kept playing tenor from there on out. So.
Cool. Awesome sauce.
That's cool, man. And what are you doing right now with music?
So I'm playing a couple of different bands with rhythm and blues and like early kind of like 1930s swing. predominantly with like two bands playing R&B, kind of like in the Sam Butera style, and kind of like a Big J McNeely style, and a couple other bands. And I play a little bit of baritone for those. And then for another group that I play with, Nick Rossi and his swing 6 or swing 4 sometimes. I play a lot of early 1930s standards. And so that's where I can kind of like pull out some of the earlier 30s stuff to stretch, because there's not a whole lot of opportunity to like play that kind of language anywhere. And so it's really nice to be able to kind of pull that into your other playing, because I feel like it's a lot more emotional. I mean, R&B and jazz and other types of jazz are really emotional, but it's like I just have a really strong feeling towards that earlier 30s stuff, just because like growing up, like that holds like a certain place in my heart. And so it's crazy to be like, wow, I can play this stuff now. Like I used to play with the record all the time, but like playing it live is like a different like feeling. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I never thought I'd play, like Jumping at the Woodside, like in my life. Like just, I just thought it's like stuff of dreams.
Can I ask you a question, Kamrin?
Yeah, absolutely.
What really inspired you to go into that genre? I mean, jazz has a long evolution, right?
Yeah.
In the last century. And so of all the, different parts of the evolution of jazz, like why did you gravitate towards that era?
The early 30s and 40s? There's maybe because like my dad had enough records and like shellac that like I could pick up that 78 record and be like, dude, Coleman Hawkins could have held this. He could have, and I have a couple of like signed autograph like records from Coleman Hawkins like on it. So it makes it really cool to be like, oh my God, he touched this. Like, and so I guess maybe it's because like I had a more of an affinity to shellac, because like my dad trusted me to not like break his records. And I'll go on quote saying, I've accidentally broken a few Charlie Parker on dial 78s, which I'll probably go to hell for. But I was playing with them, so there's that, but
that's phenomenal.
But it was just like, I don't know, like every time I hear like a particular tune, I don't like try to go anything to like try to find like one particular style. I just find like whatever really like gets my like blood pumping, and I can't stop thinking about it night after night after night after night. I'm like, oh my gosh, like it's just stuck. And like, and so then I've just over time accumulated more and more tunes that I get stuck, and I like my heart races when I hear it. Like I forget to breathe because it's so good, And so
that connection that you have with those records, right? It's like a living piece of history that you're holding in your hand that teleports you or transports you back to that time. I feel like that connection is not in, like when we listen to singles now, we're listening to on a computer, we're listening to MP3s.
Exactly.
Completely different kind of dynamic. But
it's kind of precisely. And the really interesting thing is, it's kind of like jokingly, I like to think of them as like the 10 Commandments kind of thing. It's like you're coming down and like eventually they do break, and then you no longer can read them because they get lost to history. And so I'm thankful to be able to have them now, just like just like some of the early players, like they had those, but there'll eventually be a time where there's going to be cats that don't have that anymore, and they're only going to have it on their phone. But I feel like there's going to be a certain amount of, I don't know, there's going to be something missing. I mean, not musically, but just like, you're not going to, it's not like, it's hard to say. I mean, like, you have your Miles Davis, like on your LP, like all, so it's like, and so it's like getting those albums for once, or any of the Coltrane albums.
Right, we made that point before in earlier episode of this podcast, where we were just talking about just the way that people ingest information and music, specifically, and like told the story of like how I have CDs, but I have boxes of CDs, and that's
right.
It goes as like, to be able to haul those to and from, because I've been moving so much, but just even that process of like looking in the back of the CD cover and reading about
of course.
The artists. I mean, just that, but like with a record, it's just, you're closer to the source. So it's just, for me, it's like so much more sacred.
Yeah.
And that process, and then listening to the whole record, whereas now society just tends to kind of pick and choose, and we're like kind of a singles world where you're just like, all right, I'm going to listen to this guy, and then I'm going to listen to this, and then that.
Yeah, so, exactly. Yeah, and reading those interior notes always like was so much more important as well, because it's like it felt like it developed the story. Like you get like this song, and you close your eyes and you're in the story, but then you get a little bit of background, and it just kind of makes it like more of just a magical like whole like story, whatever you want to call it. So I feel like that really kind of brought it together. But even some of the earlier shellac stuff, like they didn't have that. It was just like one single, but it's just like having the physical copy of it. It was just kind of cool, so.
I have this feeling that like technology does it expands in two directions at the same time, potentially, where it's like it takes us further away from the source and depersonalizes things sometimes, but that I think tends to have kind of a detrimental effect on like our connection and the depth of the meaning of things. At the same time, it makes things more accessible, right? And so then you get more people able to experience things. Whereas, when technology was more analog, the farther and farther you go back, the more expensive it was, the more exclusive it was, and anyway, there's also this aspect of what it can do for the future that's positive, which is that it, at the same time that we lose that like beautiful physical connection to the lineage of the music through like liner notes, through having a record where like the sound, the vibrations are actually like burned into wax. I mean, like that's you're like you physicalized the vibrations of the sound. So there's something really tangible about that, although it's ephemeral in a way. It's kind of abstract to be like, oh yes, we will measure the difference between analog and digital and how it affects you and your connection to the lineage, right? It's like, okay, man, but conceptually it can be really deep, right? But
Absolutely.
But I think like on a practical level, technology could like bring the lineage of history to life in a way that would be incredible. For instance, like VR learning, being able to be in like an immersive recreation of like videos of sessions, whether that's recording or live performances. Imagine being able to have like a VR session of like the Newport Festival with Ellington's orchestra.
Duke Ellington, right. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Watching Paul Gonsalves play
Paul Gonsalves.
27
Paul
courses
Gonsalves
or
from the
whatever
side.
it was.
Absolutely. Oh my God, never even hollering.
Yeah.
Saw all the people just getting more and more like rowdy, and as his solo develops.
Yeah. If you're like in the sax section, or like depending on like where you want to like choose to be from, or even Ellington's seat.
Oh, I mean, imagine, right? Being able, if you're a musician, being able to like play in the band.
Yeah.
Like take a seat, you put up your music, you're playing along, but you're watching like I don't know. Yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of possibilities that technology does bring forward. But it takes people with those values and those kind of ideas, the willingness to go there, and then like the willingness to spend the money to make that shit happen. And it's when you get into those realms of things like touching historical lineages, and especially the more niche it gets, the less somebody can make a great profit on it, the less priority is going to be put on it, unfortunately. And I'm going to immediately slippery slope my way into my criticism of capitalism. But that's that's what it does. It disincentivizes anything that doesn't make profit, right?
Right.
Which is tragic, and including analog technology and the great things about analog technology. But it just kind of is what it is, and I don't necessarily want to go off on that tangent too deep right now. Dana, you look like you had something to say, and then I thought it would be cool to like transition into talking about mentors and stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting our different upbringing Kamrin. My dad also had a very diverse listening spectrum, if you will. His, he put together these mixtapes, I guess, or playlists, but like cassette tapes back in those days when I was a kid. So, and there would be like Benny Goodman, Roy Ayers, Blood, Sweat, and Tears, and you know, Led Zeppelin, all on one like side
Right.
of a cassette tape.
Wow.
And I remember, quite a few of them, like the order, because you kind of get used to the order. You
Yeah.
plays them over and over again. And I remember one started with Monk. It's actually the record Monk, with Charlie Rouse, and it starts off with Just You, Just Me. Although he had already written Evidence, he decided to play Just You, Just Me, which is, and it's just Charlie Rouse's, and that really stuck with me. But it's interesting. Dan Zinn, who you may know,
Yeah.
saxophone
Wonderful
player.
sax player, sax
Yeah.
teacher in the
Yeah.
Bay
I've
I've
Area.
actually never met him, but we've contacted a few times.
Oh, cool. Yeah. Oh, I praise that guy to the end of my days, man. He was really great teacher for me. But one of the things I really appreciate him for pointing out is well, his definition, I should say, of jazz is basically originality. Having
Yeah.
your own distinct voice. So when I figured, when I really leaned into that understanding, that description of jazz, and it kind of, I know how influenced I am by all the cats that I listen to, so it kind of pushed me away from trying to figure out what a lot of my heroes were playing, because I didn't want to be an imitation of those guys.
Yeah.
So therefore, it also, I have not delved enough. I feel not nearly enough into the history of the music that I play, that the profession that I'm actually a part of, in some kind of way, in order to retain the mystery and the freshness of it in a way. Because I also feel that kind of going into, like transcribing Joe Henderson would be just, I already sound enough like him without ever transcribing that cat. But, I mean, so it would almost be like, transcribing a famous, speech from someone, and
Right.
like I want to get the gist of what they're saying and then say it in my own way. Only because I know myself, I'm so impressionable. I will come out and be like a carbon, not a carbon copy. That's impossible, but really fucking close. So therefore, I haven't. I find it really interesting that you leaned into it and really dove into it. I tend to go that far into classical music, music that I'm not any part of, because I'm just not going to have those skills. I'm not going to play
Yeah.
Schoenberg. I'm not going to play Schoenberg at Village Vanguard or
Oh, but you can hear the nuances, in the harmony, the really like intricate harmony in some of your compositions that kind of are connected to somebody like Schoenberg or Stravinsky,
yeah,
or
for sure. But
Prokofiev or Scriabin, whatever.
Yeah. But anyway, I just thought that was really, really interesting. I'm really admiring your perspective and how it, how we end up growing from our influences like that. So.
Right, like evolving to a certain extent. And I actually always think that's one of my biggest complaints is never is either like not trying to develop like an original voice or even, what would you call it? Like, but I also feel like you have to like dig the tradition and understand the tradition before writing like your own kind of thing. And so when I do like try to like play something, because I actually didn't know the theoretical side. I've only been learning theory for about 4 years now. I've learned everything. I've only learned everything from records. And so so I feel like I've been playing catch up the last 4 years. I've been practicing way more than I'm probably bet more than I definitely can handle, because I get fried like sometimes. But it's just I feel like I have so much to catch up to at a certain extent, because I've just been playing with the records, because reading about my heroes, a lot of them were like, oh, we jammed, played records, played a gig, jam, played records, played a gig. Now, of course, a lot of them had the musical training, but a lot of those earlier heroes that I was really impressed or and had impressions on me were not learning that kind of way. Like they had some sort of theoretical background, but it was very limited, and especially to most of the African Americans that I was really influenced by. And so it was just like gigs, jam sessions, and practicing and what they were learning on the bandstand. But
yeah, orally, right? Oral
orally,
tradition,
correct,
and
yeah.
just like teaching each other head charts, like just
exactly,
without
exactly.
a chart.
And I guess no one complained enough about my playing. So when I started playing professionally, it was kind of the same way. Like I wasn't practicing the theory. I was just playing the songs, and I'm like, oh, this riff kind of works over this tune here, and I didn't really know like the theory of it. It was just like, oh, I just play what sounds okay. And after, and so that's how I got to learn, because I started playing professionally at 14 in 2 big bands, and as the lead tenor, and thankfully I didn't suck enough for them to throw me out. Mostly because I knew most of the tunes. Like I was really familiar with a lot of the material, and I could play it without the sheet music because I just knew it like the back of my hand. And so it really gave me an easy time to cultivate my own sound. I was really impressed by Lester Young really early on. Like I always wanted to play like Lester Young, and I would ask my sisters. I was like, okay, if I could, I was like, okay, I'd play a riff. I'm like, okay, does that sound more like Coleman Hawkins or does that sound more like Lester Young? I was like, I need to know.
Would they be able to respond to you like they knew exactly like, oh, the nuances of
my older sister was very nuanced in that kind of way, but she was like, you sound like yourself. She's like, but and she's, and I was like, damn it. I was like, I need to be like a little bit of a combination of both. I want to be able to pull out some of the things, because I sort of liked Lester Young's sound, but the first time I played a big band gig trying to play like Lester Young, I did not get heard. And I was like, I would ask some of the other band members, I'm like, I was like, is there anything I can improve on? Like, what would it? And they're like, I can't hear a damn thing you're playing. And so, and a lot of the big bands that I started out with, which really helped me cultivate what they called the Texas tenor sound. And that's not like in a fake way, but like, that's kind of like the lineage that I like to carry on. I started to figure out that the Texas tenor language was something that kind of more fit my vocabulary and the way I thought and the way the song bounces, because Lester Young kind of like plays above it, where like some of the tenors are playing kind of with the drummer. And since I always wanted to be a drummer, when I'm playing something, I'll like move a certain way because I want the drummer to like hit somewhere where I'm playing. Like, okay, when I do this, I want the drummer to hit the bass drum like right here. Of course, nobody's doing that, and they're only going to do that when I write the music out. But it's like mentally, I've always kind of played that game.
That interaction does happen, like by nature of just the way you're phrasing your solo, the way you're telling the story. And like today I played a gig, for instance, with some great drummers, 2 drummers at Balboa Theater with Danny Brown, another tenor player that it was his birthday today, and a lot of great people came out, celebrated. And there were 2 drummers, Genius Wesley, and then another cat that I forgot his name, but just slamming and the way that they were reacting with each other. And it was incredible. 2 drums, and Genius would set something up, and then the other drummer would just answer him. And so bringing it back to you and, your interaction with drummers, like within your solo, you will be able to cultivate and to kind of egg on that musician that you're having a dialogue with. This is what we do as musicians, right? And we're trying to do that here in this podcast as well. It's amazing process. It's super dynamic. It's super rich, super fresh. And you have that power, especially as like a tenor player with like a big sound like you do. I've played with you. We've been to Europe. We've toured to Europe together. And so I know kind of like how you're able to like, take the reins and really, really kind of, here we go. This is where we're heading, and that drummer does. You can hear him react. I don't know if it's like exactly where he, you wanted the bass drum place, but he is definitely, he'll be reacting to you. So it's interesting how we can have that conversation.
Well,
Absolutely.
It is a language, it is. I will say, I was literally, was it yesterday or the day before? I really want to learn Italian, French, Polish, Anyway, all these
Oh, man.
languages, Cinque. And I came across, I can't even remember the guy's name, but I saved the video because it was so incredible. And it's amazing that I haven't come across this concept before. But this guy took 4 years of French, went to Paris, couldn't communicate because he learned it, like all the grammar, he learned all the proper
Right.
ways. He could read, he could do all that. But when it came
Conjugate
down to
verbs.
offer, asking for a baguette, he couldn't he couldn't get it out. And then, so fast forward, pandemic happens. He's like, you know what? I want to learn Italian. 2 weeks. So he tries this completely different method of just like taking the most popular 500 or 1,000 words, ignoring everything else, forgetting the grammar, memorizing the words, just a week at a time, get a couple hundred words. And week 2, he was already speaking better Italian than 4 years of learning French, just by really narrowing it down. And so to me, I'm relating this to the way you've picked up music. It's been an oral thing. I mean, well, from an early age as well. I mean, when you hear it young, I mean, any language is gonna happen a lot easier than it is as an old person.
Yeah.
But but it's not, all the intricate hard words like, procurement or whatever, these weird words that are not really important, or AKA the super intricate theory of why certain things work isn't as important as actually just speaking the language and being understood and heard by those around you. And it's really fascinating, your process of learning. And it just, and it also it's so it just highlights to my brain how many different ways people get to where they are. And anyway, I just want to put that out
Wow,
there.
yeah. I could just on the subject of that, and then when you, regardless of how much harmony you've learned or not, the process of transcribing for me, that's why I loved my transcribing class in college, because all of a sudden you're diving into the content of some of these musicians that we love, idolize, that are like our mentors. And you really, regardless of how much you come to the table with, right, how much understanding you have of the theoretical stuff, when you start like discovering how they played how they phrased, and the storyline that they're telling, all these little harmonic devices start appearing before your eyes, and it's so magical, because then you kind of like piece things together, like, oh, this is how you can play a dominant chord with like a sharp 11. Oh, he's using this pattern with it, which is just a juxtaposition of like a melodic minor scale, that outlines those notes or whatever. But you start putting things together because you went in and you just orally kind of let that music shower all over you, and then all of a sudden you're just starting to understand the inner workings of the actual music, and the theory starts kind of popping up out of nowhere. It's kind of cool.
Yeah, you made
Yeah.
you made your own map, in your brain. And then, then comes a time, you learn those 1,000 words, and then you go back, and then you learn the grammar. And it just enhances what you already know. But the thing is, you can already speak, and you can already. That's really, really beautiful, man. And honestly, again, that's the way it was done originally. That's the way language transfers into our kids anyway, actually, in general. But
Right.
extra language, just musical art language, that was yeah, awesome, man. Oh,
Yeah.
about the mouthpiece too. I want to talk about the mouthpiece, man. Woo! Yeah.
What was that?
Oh, you talk about the mouthpiece not being heard at the first time. I remember that
Yeah.
very well. It's
Yeah.
like certain mouthpieces have the sound and the texture, but then you put it in context, it's like, well, where am I? Yeah, but that's a beautiful struggle. But that's the beautiful fight for a tenor player's sound that we all go through. My grandfather, by the way, was a tenor player and from Texas, and he was
Oh, right on.
definitely a big and he learned the exact same way you did. He didn't really learn a lot of the theory, and I loved his playing and his sound, and he had a big 10M. I have it around here, but
Right on.
yeah, but no, awesome, man. I mean, I gotta hear you. I want to hear one of these.
Absolutely. Well, it's like I started out that way, really a really soft sound, and over 6 to 8 months, I couldn't afford any mouthpieces. So at the time, because I was like 14 and the gigs were playing like for a 16-piece band, for both of them, the 16-piece bands, I was not making a whole lot, but it was a lot of fun. We played a good amount of gigs. We were playing at least twice a week, and that was really helpful on top of me playing in middle school and high school, because it gave me an outlet to go play. But I kept getting harder and harder and harder reads where I was like, okay, this 7 mouthpiece with a 5 reed, I couldn't play. I was like, okay, like I was still closing the mouthpiece with a 7 and a 5 reed. And so and now I'm up to like a 10 mouthpiece with a 3 reed. And I feel like that finally is the resistance enough, because when I'm really wailing, it doesn't close up. And that's what like Lukash, now I've been playing that same mouthpiece since I met Lukash or whatever. And so it just gives me that like color and texture that nothing else does. And the fact that like I'm able to play at this like extreme volume, because I'm my dad jokingly calls it the fire hose because it's so open, it's like it looks like a banana from the side, but the thing is like when you get back to a subtone on that same like wide open mouthpiece, you can change the color and the texture with a large chamber, large tip mouthpiece, because it has 0 baffle. Because that's what my heroes played on. They had no baffle. So I was like, okay, that's what I need to play on, because they were able to get bright and dark sounds on very dark mouthpieces. So I should be able to do the same thing.
What pieces are you? I'm sorry to get geeky, guys, but what?
No, it's all good. Yeah, it's a it's a Theowani and Bika 10.
Okay.
So
yeah, I've only tried a couple. Anyway, yeah. Cool. Awesome. I don't want to go. We'll have to chat after this and like.
Yeah, I know. Everybody's like, nobody wants to hear about the reeds and the mouthpieces and the ligatures.
I love that talk. Shoot, I love that talk. When tenor players start going and man.
Hey,
like 20 mouthpieces sitting right here next to me. So I am not faithful to my mouthpieces. I'm like really all over the place. But anyway, it's cool. It's awesome.
I wonder if we couldn't watch a few minutes of the Victor Wooten TED Talk.
Oh, yeah.
You guys know this?
I don't know it. No.
Okay.
I know Victor, but he's a great
Yeah.
dude.
So you've probably heard him tell the story. He tells the story, all the time. But let's check it out, because I think it relates to what we're talking, in and through and around about theory and learning by ear, and basically like how do we learn music, kind of what's the optimal way, and definitely like the correlation to language as well. So yeah, I'm gonna share the screen.
Yeah.
The sound.
Speaking of mentors, he's definitely one of my favorite bass players, and I saw him with Bela Fleck in the Flecktones so long ago, man. That just blew my mind.
Team when they came to Berkeley?
No, actually, no.
Yeah, I remember being at the BBC, seeing that. I was just a little
yeah.
kid. A little happy little kid. All right, cool.
Yeah,
Wow.
Future Man with his the crazy.
Yeah,
man, that was so cool.
Guitar thing.
Yeah, I think he does call it drumatar. Is that
drumatar? Yeah,
something
like that.
All right, here's Victor. I tried to find a good spot to start.
You don't teach a kid how to spell. Teaching a kid to spell milk before they've drinking a lot of it for a few years doesn't make sense, does it? But for some reason, we still think it does in music. We want to teach them the rules and the instruments first. But by the time I was about 2 and they put that toy in my hands, I was already very musical, because I believe you're born musical. Just listen to anybody's voice. Listen to any child's voice. There's no more pure music than that. So my brothers somehow knew I was born musical, but they wanted me to be a bass player. So when I was old enough, they put a toy in my hands and they would play. So I would just bounce up and down and strum along too.
This reminds me, I thought of this instantly when you said your sister was like, don't be a drummer, because I'm a drummer, right? I don't know if you guys ever get a chance to play, but I mean, I felt like this too when I grew up. My father's, a clarinetist, my mother's a violinist, and like I started playing violin when I was very little, and I really quickly moved to piano. And then in middle school, I went to clarinet, and I was picking it up fast, but like, I just, I knew like in my bones, I'll spare you the whole story, that like, I wanted to play the piano, I did not want to like follow in my father's footsteps. Not that you can't do it. I mean, look at Robbie Coltrane, and Matt Garrison,
Oh, yeah.
etc. There are plenty of people who do it. But anyway, the family thing of like, having something that's compatible, not the same, is it's just a really cool dynamic. And just a preface, so like, Victor's the youngest of his brothers. I forget how many, 4 or 5, something, and they all played instruments. And so when he came along, they didn't have a bass player yet in their like family band. And so they were like, Victor's gonna fucking play the bass. So they,
oh man,
as he explained earlier in the first 5 minutes of this, like they just like put a bass in his hands, like play bass. Anyway, like here he goes on. Sorry, go ahead.
No, his brother, I had a video, like an instructional video when I was in high school of him, and he just describes like when he learned his double thumb technique, or he learned it from his guitar playing brother. That double thumb thing is amazing.
But the coolest thing about it, again, is it wasn't about the instrument. I was learning to play music, not an instrument. And I continue that hopefully today. Again, what I did know was I knew what it meant when my brother opened up his hi-hat at the end of a 4-bar phrase. Or I learned these phrases versus that phrase, the same way a baby knows what it means when the mother raises the pitch of her voice versus the father lowering the pitch of his. You know these things, and even though you may not even understand what the word means. And so you're learning all these things. By the time a baby can speak a real word, they know already a lot about the language. So I was learning music the same way. By the time I had an instrument in my hands, I was already very musical. When I turned about 3 years old, Reggie took 2 strings off of one of his 6-string guitars. He took the 2 high strings off, and that became my first real instrument. And so Reggie actually started teaching me to put my finger in certain places to produce notes to songs I already knew. So I wasn't starting from the beginning. I was musical first. Now I just had to put that music through an instrument. And looking back on it now, I realize that's how I learned to talk. It wasn't about learning the instrument first. Who cares about the instrument you talk with? It's about what you have to say. And so I've always musically maintained my own voice. I've always had something to say. And I've learned how to speak through my instrument. So if we think about a couple of things, not being forced to practice, not being told what you have to say when I'm speaking English again, not being told what you have to say. When a teacher teaches you a new word in English, she has you put it into a sentence, into context right away. A music teacher will tell you to go practice it, right? Practicing works, but it's a slower process than putting it into context. And we know that with English. And so
anyway, he goes on, this is a really interesting talk. And, like anybody and everybody, I'm not sure that like 100% of what he says really holds weight completely in every way. But I'm moved by it. It's a beautiful talk. And I think the core idea of music being like a language, and that we can learn it in a similar way that we learn language, really resonates. And then like I still think there is room for learning the nuts and bolts of language as well. And that actually, ironically, I think in general, like especially in public school, I don't know about other places, but like we don't teach the nuts and bolts of language very well, like the grammar and whatnot. And I don't know why that is. My wife is becoming a language tutor now and studying this method called Orton Gillingham, and they break that shit down, man. It's like scientific, and it's really It's really cool. And it's like all these things where you're like, man, English is fucked up. Why is it, English is
All these
crazy.
weird rules.
And it's like, oh, actually there are reasons for that. I didn't realize that. Oh, you can organize how this is. I feel like, music theory has probably been like almost over organized in some ways, or perhaps just
Yes.
it's beautifully organized, but we spend so much energy on it sometimes to the detriment of like approaching it in that very organic, linguistic
Right,
kind of way.
right. I noticed that I'm beginning this process of writing a series of books that I want to have in multiple volumes. And there's so much that's already like been laid out in the whole pedagogy, right? And my whole intention is to just express like the language that I've learned and the kind of things that I've learned along the way, being able to put it in kind of a really concise manner and not be like too wordy or too like watered down, and just get to the nitty gritty, so to speak, of like the ideas of phrasing, of the music that it really is coming from jazz, the language of jazz, but also borrowing from classical music, and then borrowing from the African rhythms, Brazilian rhythms. And so, yeah, that's that process to me. I feel like how I stare at like the wall of like, kind of sometimes I have these visions. I sort of started microdosing a little bit. And I had this vision last night actually where like harmony just laid out, kind of like spelled out like all these equations, kind of like just imagining like a physicist like writing out equations. So I was like looking at all the harmonies, just like, oh my God, it's just so overwhelming. And then I kind of had this epiphany where you don't have to recreate the wheel with this stuff. Like as I'm writing, it's like just it's how you express yourself, like going back to your the expression and the voice, and being able to then kind of have a different, I don't know, interpretation of the theory of music. So anyway, I had that realization yesterday about the process of writing these books.
I watched a really well, a couple things yesterday. It's interesting that I'm literally just now thinking of this because we've been talking about it for a while. But yesterday I attended Barry Harris's. It's a Zoom class now, but
Oh,
he does it on the weekends. Now you can sign up on his website, and I got a chance to hang with Barry. Oh Lord, this is 3 years ago now, in Italy. But I've also been to his class. When we were meeting in person, and he has. Yes, they're very different concepts of how to explain music theory from different people, and uh,
I saw one of his videos. It was brilliant, man. The way he's talking to his students, his
yeah,
interaction, and the way he develops the ideas and has the students play the ideas. Just
yeah.
amazing.
Um, and it's really really deep and simple at the same time. If you will, I want to. There's a guy on. I saw I'm gonna have to look for it while we're talking, but I
Mm.
think the first couple of minutes of this, when he just describes basically Barry's concept, was
Mm, mm.
um, it kind of blew my mind into 1,000 pieces, and then put it back. It was really mind blowing, and just kind of like, how haven't I seen this before?
Mm, 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 mm.
I'm gonna bring it up here. Is that okay, Peter? I'm not sure if
Yeah,
I
do you
can
need a
share it or
minute
not.
to like search
No,
through it?
I just got it. I just found it. I knew
Great.
I was gonna find it quickly. I just saw it recently. So, then share sounds. The Zoom days. Anyone looking at this from like 2030? Please just
Like, come
bear
on,
with
dudes.
us.
Oh yeah, the six diminished scale. Right, right. This is the one I saw too.
Yeah, dude, guys, this crap is just.
Yeah, yeah, dude.
It's not crap, actually.
No, it's divine, man. The way he, yeah, his methodology.
The sixth diminished concept is all about seeing relationships between chords and creating harmonic and melodic movement when supporting a melody or playing through chord changes. Barry often refers to the modern day jazz student or musician as being 2/5 players, meaning that we tend to see chord changes as separate blocks which we read from a page, as opposed to seeing the relationships within a chord and the possible inner movements. So let's first look at what the major sixth diminished scale is. It's basically a major scale with an added flat 6 or sharp 5 interval, making it an 8-note scale. So in the key of C, the notes would be C, D, E, F, G, A flat, A, and B.
Like a
You
bebop
might
scale.
already be familiar with this set of notes if you've ever checked out any of the bebop scale concepts, as this is the same set of intervals which make up a major bebop scale. However, even though both scales share the same notes, you don't really want to think of the major sixth diminished scale as the same as the major bebop scale, just because the bebop scale concept is purely about adding that A flat to act just as a chromatic passing tone in order to make the chord tones land on the downbeats. Whereas in the sixth diminished scale, the A flat is an essential note which makes up the core sound of the scale when harmonized. So even though both concepts share the same scale, they are not the same purely because their functions are different. Another way of viewing this scale is by seeing it as being made up by a major sixth chord and a diminished chord. This is because when harmonizing the scale by stacking thirds to generate 4-note chords, or by Barry's definition of constructing a chord, skip a note, skip a note, skip a note within the notes of the scale, if we do this, all we get is a C major sixth and a D diminished chord, which alternate between their inversions. So if you harmonize each note of the scale, you would get the 4 inversions of C6 and then also the 4 inversions of D diminished, which is the equivalent of an F diminished, A flat diminished, and B diminished, as they all share the exact same notes. So for the purpose of this lesson, let's view the scale as being made up of a major sixth chord and a diminished chord built from the major 7th degree of the scale, so C6 and B diminished.
Okay.
This also allows us to now see the diminished chord as being built.
You can watch this, but I found the spot that I want to go to. There's when he talks, he brings then this what can be seen as a spiritual element to this, which kind of again brought my brain into a different state of being. I didn't know it could happen.
So now, before we go further into the applications of these scales, let's get into how Barry came up with this diminished theory. This concept has actually been around for a long time, as it's been a common arranging technique used for early big band writing. However, Barry discovered it from a completely different angle and categorized it, gave it names, and has been developing the endless possibilities ever since. So Barry has quite a unique perspective on the theoretical side of music, which you won't find being taught at any music school. He takes quite a spiritual approach, starting with the 12 notes of the chromatic scale. Now, these are all the notes in our Western music, and he refers to this as being our musical universe, or the 12 disciples, or the 12 zodiac signs, or the 12 months of the year.
Wow,
but basically, he refers to these 12 notes as being God. He then goes on to say that God then made man and woman, or Adam and Eve, which he refers to as being the 2 whole tone scales. So one starting on C, which gives you the notes C, D, E, G flat, A flat, and B flat, and then one starting on the note D flat, giving you the rest of the possible notes in our universe, so D flat, E flat, F, G, A, and B. So what then happened next? The man and woman had children. They had 3 children, which Barry refers to as the 3 possible diminished chords available to us in our musical universe: C diminished, D flat diminished, and D diminished. Each of these 3 diminished chords, as Barry puts it, all share a 50-50 split of DNA or chromosomes from the 2 whole tone scales. Because if you take a C diminished chord, you get the notes C, E flat, G flat, and A, and 2 of those notes, C and G flat, come from the first parent, the C whole tone scale, and the other 2 notes, E flat and A, come from the second parent, the D flat whole tone scale. You'll find that this is the same for also the D flat diminished and D diminished. So by changing a couple of notes, you can get to any diminished chord from either one of the whole tone scales, which is already giving us some options to create harmonic movement with. This way of thinking is all very logical, and it's a really elegant way to see these relationships, but here it is with a more mathematical view. So if 12 is all our notes, the chromatic scale or God, if we divide that by 6, we get 2 6-note scales, the 2 whole tone scales, or man and woman. Divide 12 by 4 and we get the 3 4-note diminished chords, the children. We can also continue this by dividing 12 by 3, which will give us the 4 augmented triads. And finally, if we divide 12 by 2, we get the 6 possible tritones. So what we then do next, in order to get all the other chords which are used in what Barry calls the diminished family, is we move certain diminished chord tones around. So if we take a C diminished, which we know is the exact same as an E flat diminished, G flat diminished, and A diminished, but if we lower one of the chord tones, we get a dominant 7th chord. We can do this to any of the chord tones, which will result into 4 different dominant 7th chords.
Anywho,
B-
this gets
With the flat nines. Yeah,
it
totally.
gets deep, but man,
Yeah.
but at the same
know.
time, it doesn't
Oh,
get
I
deep.
see,
It's
yeah.
really simple, and it's like fucking hey, man. This has been sitting. This particular perspective of the same 12 notes that Bach had and Gesualdo and you know, Schoenberg and Coltrane and all these, you know, Luther Vandross and, you know, Led Zeppelin, the same 12 notes. This is the perspective that was been sitting in front of my face. Could have slapped me, could have bit me if it was a snake, but I just never saw it. And it's anyway. I wrote there's a tune I wrote for Kenny Barron, and I made a 4-part saxophone arrangement using that kind of diminished theory stuff that he was using. And it's like what? Why have I never ever looked at this like with any sort of seriousness? Anyway, so that's enough of the brain hurts perhaps, but whatever. That's
Well, we can obviously tell that Barry Harris is one of your mentors then in that sense, right? Like
big time.
Pretty deep right there. Let's ask Kamrin, man. How about you? No, this is what we're doing. This is great. Let's share some of our stories. You know, I'd love to hear about some of Peter's early mentors. You know,
Absolutely.
So, yeah, Kamrin, you want to start out, man? Start us out and
yeah, sure. I can start out.
You know,
I can start out with
you.
Yeah, but as far as like, so it obviously. Like the one that I had talked to you guys about was Herschel Evans, which was one of my first real. I had, like I said, Coleman Hawkins or Lester Young were the first like true mentors, kind of like that I was like listening to, and Coltrane as well. Like, but Coltrane didn't stick to me as much. It didn't reach out to me. Like I liked his ballads a lot, but some of the other stuff I thought in my personal journey I found it a little too wordy. And I respected like the art of it, but I was like, that's not the story that I'm going to tell. It's been told, and there's a lot of gentlemen that have gone further past that. Like Michael Brecker would be like, I would think in another extension. It's just like, you know, there's a certain, I think Ben Webster and Arnett Cobb said it really well. It's like, you know, you just don't reach into another man's bag. And it's like, I just know my hands are not going to move that fast. And maybe they could, but I just don't think.
Don't sell yourself short now.
Don't limit yourself now.
But I just when I think about stuff, it doesn't move that quickly. I mean, it's, you know, so I think, or like, I mean, and then obviously I'm at the beginning of like a lot of my theories. So maybe like, of course I'm willing to stay open to not detriment some of that. But I did realize that early on. So I was playing with those really early Count Basie records, and I had I was playing with the Lester Young stuff, and I was really captivated by another tenor saxophonist in the band, and I didn't know the name of that particular saxophonist, and he's the Herschel Evans, which his nickname was Tex, because he's from Temple, Texas, and his tone. My dad has like all the records of him predominantly, and I remember learning one of his ballads, "Blue and Sentimental," which is one of my favorite ballads to play.
I heard that. It's gorgeous.
Yeah, and as far as like, you know, Dogging Around, and these are songs that I learned at a very, very young age, and I just remember like his tone was just like, it was like Coleman Hawkins but better. It like simplified it was like Hawkins, but it's simplified, and it really was like. It was like it took the Hawkins theory, and then it was like, how about not a whole lot of theory? How about just emotion? How about we just put emotion? And that really hit me. And like I remember like being super young and just like tearing up a little bit. And I'm like, that's so good. Like, how am I ever gonna play anything like that? And I actually just started to learn all of his solos in the Lester in the early 1936. You know, to 1939. That's when he passed away at 28. So he's only in the Basie lineage for only a few years. But he sure as hell made an impact enough. And so the warmth of his tone and like the style of his playing, he just come out like really hard swinging. And it was like he always was like playing like with Joe Jones, and like, you know, like it was just like just fucking swang so hard. And I was like, man, like there's just nothing like that. And then I have a 33 record that has some of the early Savoy. It might be the first time they went to the Savoy. I may be wrong on that, but it has the Count Basie Band at the Savoy Ballroom in like 1937. And when they're playing Bugle Call Rag, he's the tenor player that is playing over the top of the band when the band was like swinging hard and like they're just playing like a kind of like a couple of background riffs, but he's playing a solo over it. And I had never heard anything like that. And it was just like really melodic, and like the band would play something and he was like playing, and it was just like really aggressive. And I was like, wow, this is 30s music. Like it really hit a different like note in me. And then I happened to find out that he had other disciples as well, like Arnett Cobb and Illinois Jacquet, that kind of furthered my search on. And then I happened to go through, because I already knew of Big J McNeely and Ike Quebec, but I had never heard of him. And so then I realized that like he was like the founder of this Texas tenor language, and how that kind of like accumulated these different types of like big chested tenor players that like played without microphones and these giant mouthpieces, and you just had these great, and they all have these great sounds. And the funny thing is they all have like a little bit of this, like they play in a way that I call like preaching. Like it's like, you know, like it's just like, it sounds like they're talking, you know, and it really just hit a different chord with me, because I was like, it was like Ben Webster, but in a different way. And Ben Webster's kind of from like the Kansas City school, and obviously they played together. But that lineage is just something that I was like really struck by. And I have yet to be struck further than anything else. And that's kind of been a jumping off platform. And thankfully I haven't ever played with any bands that I haven't had to change a style to. And so I've always been able to continue to cultivate that kind of style by like pulling in these different heroes. And then as soon as I get on the bandstand, throw that shit away and just play whatever comes out. Mm-hmm. And that has been really helpful, because I try not to play like exactly what they're playing, but I try to play in like the spirit of the way that they're playing. And that's had a big impact as well. It's like, what kind of energy does that give me? And how can I give that back to the audience? You know, like when you listen back to those old, like one record set that I have, it's like these really giant, like almost transcription size of the Jazz at the Philharmonics. And the first one I remember hearing was Blues Part 2 with Illinois Jacquet playing, and he's like screaming altissimo notes, probably the first ones recorded, and he's honking and wailing. And I was just like goosebumps, like, oh man, like it just like you take your breath away. And so I always try to think like, how can I give that to like any song all the time? And so that's really affected me. And then learning about them as well as their personality types. Like Herschel Evans didn't like the bass player in the Count Basie Band's mouthpiece, or he didn't like him playing sousaphone. And so the article that I sent to you, gentlemen,
right? Peeped that.
Yeah, he didn't like pork pie hats either, which Lester was like really fond of and wearing at the time.
Like, well, but he was really from that article, he was super dapper. Like he even though he had criticisms of other people, the way they dressed or their style, he was like super like in tune with his style.
Yeah, absolutely. Exactly. And he was like, always dressed to the nines. If you see him in any picture, he's immaculate. Like there's not something, everything is pressed. There's not something that's where it needs to be, where it's not, as far as like, so just really like clean. And so he took that mouthpiece and he was like, he threw that into the pork pie hat out of like a 39-story window, like during a jam session. And he's like, and he turned to Buck Clayton and he's like, you didn't see anything. He's like, that's none of my business. So it's just, and I guess he just like, he had a beef with like Billie Holiday. He's like, man, that bitch, whatever. And it was just really funny because it's like, and so it's really interesting to know. And which makes me enjoy them a little more because they're, a little more human. You don't get to hear those kind of sides. Like you hear about Lester Young and all our other heroes, but you're never hearing about like, man, he really didn't like his eggs cooked this way, or he hated this guy, or like they just didn't like groove together. And then it kind of makes more sense because you don't hear them play together as much. And so it's like interesting how that kind of dynamic, like even musically, as far as personality wise, like how those kind of correlate as well.
Hey, I just want to capture something that you said that I thought touched on something important. It's like, I don't remember exact words, but you said you were talking about how it made you feel and the goosebumps you got, and you said like, I just want to give that,
Right. Yeah.
when you were talking about your own playing, and I think that's a powerful universal right there, and I think for me, like when I was thinking about mentors, that's a big piece of it too, whether it's meant like direct personal mentors or the kind of influences and idols kind of mentors. um it's like what they gave to me, I want to give forward,
Yeah.
in my own way, of course, but I think that's that's an incredibly beautiful part of being human, man. It's this passing down of something to others that is so meaningful that they want to pass it down to people beyond them.
Absolutely.
Is a transfer of knowledge from someone who's experienced and has found their own voice and is inspirational and influential. Then I've had many mentors, probably more than I can count or say in this particular call. But I remember one. It was a mentorship can be, I think, as short as an afternoon or as long as a lifetime, right? But I remember this one afternoon at Rayburn Music in Boston. I don't know if you guys remember that.
Yeah, Rayburn, we know Rayburn.
And it was just about closing time. They're pulling the gates, and then comes to the door, Illinois Jackette.
Whoa.
And I was like, oh, and I was the only customer left in there. So so Emilio was like, well, of course we gotta let let Mr. Jackette in, and I don't remember what he was looking for, but it ended up kind of being a little lesson. He was asking me what I was playing, and I was really working my ass off at that point in time with my setup. And he's like, "Why are you working so hard?" And he let me, and he's like, "I'm just playing, I don't know, it had to be like a 7 link with like a
Yeah.
two reed or something like that." And I was like, "What on earth? How is that even possible?" And he said, "I can get that kind of sound you're getting and this kind of sound. I can do all the kind of sounds I want with this." And then he freaking gave me his horn and let me play his horn.
What?
I was like, I'll never
Guy
forget
like
that.
that.
Forget
Goodness.
that. And he was completely free to share anything. He just was a super open guy, man. And there's very few guys, to be honest, that I've met who aren't like that. Most guys are pretty open, I feel, to well, the guys that I that I've drooled over and been super inspirational about. I mean, same thing with I met Chick Corea around the corner from the Boston Symphony Hall.
Right on.
The same with him. Very open. I mean, you can see videos of him even online today. I mean, all these guys are Mike Brecker. I mean, you think of Coltrane practicing with all these different cats. It's interesting what you say about Herschel Evans and the Prez. That is really interesting stuff, man. Seems like it was, at least in that particular case, it was a little bit more competitive than one might have imagined.
Yeah.
Huh. People cutting each other on the bandstand. Don't they
Yeah.
have stories like in New York, right?
Absolutely.
It was really like
Well-
who was the apex or the alpha male, who can like deliver
Well,
the
but
goods.
it's not even just that. It was like a really friendly debate. They were really good friends. And actually, when Lester Young came out to I believe it was California earlier on, he was Herschel Evans was playing in the like 1934, 1933 Lionel Hampton band before Lionel Hampton had gone to Benny Goodman to become famous. He had his own little band going on there.
Wow.
And which is funny because Herschel Evans being the first of the Texas tenor, if you think about it, flying home about 11 or like 8 years later with Illinois Jackette. So obviously Lionel Hampton felt that kind of Texas vibe or whatever, like those cats were laying down. Like he was digging it and picking it up because Earl Bostic, who had that real big alto sound, he was also digging that, and he was playing on some of his early tunes as well. But when Lester Young went back to Kansas City, and they were like, okay, guys, Benny Moten's passed away. Basie's like, I'm gonna put this band together. I have the second school of Lester Young, but I need the first school. And I'm not gonna get Coleman Hawkins. That's not happening, you know. But he's like, who am I gonna get? And Lester Young was like, I know a cat that let me borrow suits when I was poor, and I could, like, he was like letting him borrow. I don't know if he let him borrow his horn. That may have been something, but Herschel Evans would let Lester Young borrow his suits and his tuxedos to go play gigs to make money when he was like on the street living. And so that kind of warmth and friendliness, I think that really comes through through his playing. But also, Lester Young drove in Count Basie's car from Kansas City to California, like on a whim, to go pick him up and bring him back to Kansas City to start the Count Basie band. And so, like, it wasn't like, oh, let's just get the next cat that plays like Coleman Hawkins. They're like, no, we need this guy. And so but you don't hear that kind of brotherly love. Like, you don't hear about that. Like, it was just like, oh, they play back and forth. And and supposedly it really affected Lester after Herschel had passed, because, you know, I don't think anybody else was as nice, or I don't think anybody else like kept that kind of like warmth and friendliness in the band as far as like towards him, you know, like being at such a low point in his career, in his life. It was like, you know, Don Bias wasn't like, hey, Lester, let me get this for you. I mean, I don't know, but I would have to assume that probably not, you know. So I think that has a lot to do with their kind of their musical conversations that I like to think of. I usually don't think of like cutting each other. I like to think that like they're, you know, like who can speak like more fluently, you know, kind of thing.
Right. It's again the conversation that's going on.
Yeah, exactly.
Like when I heard those old records, I always think they're just having the conversation. But just like through reading like Miles's autobiography, and sometimes it's like painted like, you know, there would be some cats and the motherfuckers would, you know, be playing.
Yeah, they're shooting up and they're gonna get, you know, they're shooting up and then they're playing like tempos, like, you know, like ghastly fucking, you know, very fast tempos. And so it's, you know, at that point it's like you got to deliver some goods. So there's gonna be some cutting on stage or whatever. I don't know. Absolutely, yeah.
It's part of the history.
I'd like to just jump in on this like human tip of this, which I think as a musician, as a jazz musician, it's been absolutely crucial for me to stay connected to jazz music and to stay in a feeling of like, this is something I want to be a part of. You know, I know jazz covers that, like the social experience of jazz covers a very broad range in terms of like the cutting, the drugs, the you know, the ego, the masculinity that is can go over the edge into toxic land, and the brotherhood, the you know, and sisterhood, really, you know, when you go back into it and you look deep into it, and just the like shared humanity, the conversations, and you know, stories like that bring that to life, right? Of, you know, here's this dude Herschel giving Lester suits, right? They're just two dudes, you know, or musicians, and helping each other out, and I think that speaks to something that's very resonant, especially with me personally. And when I think about my mentors, a lot of the time, you know, my mentors were not exactly like carbon copies of what I wanted to be, or I didn't want to be a carbon copy of what they were. either musically or personally. But they allowed room for like more than just getting better at music, right? In our relationship, it was about like inspiring me. When I think about like Tom McKinley, and he treated me in ways that were almost like inappropriate for like where I was in my life, but but he was coming so genuinely with his passion for music, and he would get in my face and talk about like, you got to have the fire, man. You got to have the fire.
What?
Like, forget all this other stuff, playing with friends and getting with girls and whatever. Like, you can do all that later. You got to have the fire. And I mean, I just wasn't ready to take that in, but it stuck with me. It certainly stuck with me, and it influenced me, and still to this day, that was like 30 years ago. And I carry the energy of that, and like Tom's energy and his fire. He was like transmitting it to me, even though I wasn't ready to fully receive it. It's still inside me, and like another story that on a totally different level, like being allowed to be human. So around the same time, early teenage years, 13, 14, 15, maybe. I was studying with Joe Mulholland, who had a long career playing and teaching at Berkeley, still in Boston. Great pianist. And he was so cool and perceptive about where I was at. I was struggling with like trying to maintain a disciplined attitude towards music, trying to keep practicing a lot, and I just what didn't feel like a top priority to me. And at that point, I actually thought I wanted to be an athlete. And Joe was a great basketball player, man. I mean, great, but like he was a legit basketball player. And at this place, there was a basketball outdoor outdoor court, and sometimes I'd get there early and shoot baskets, and there was at least once, if not a couple times, when he came out and not only shot some baskets with me, but like we spent most or all of our lesson. I remember once in particular, we spent the entire lesson just talking and playing hoops. And I really needed that, man. I needed to be allowed to just be human and to just be where I was at, and to just like play basketball, if that's what it meant, to like to not be like a stressed out motherfucker at 14 years old,
Wow.
And so that was deep mentorship for me in a way, that meant more than any of the like 2/5 voicings that he taught me, which were fundamental to me, like, getting a decent, foundation in jazz piano, right? But like just being allowed to be human was huge, man.
Incredible.
I think that really was really impactful, because he, obviously he was seeing like, okay, like, I think like from like an outsider's perspective, it was like, okay, like I see that he's trying, like, that there's definitely like a want to play the music, but then there's also like this kind of want to play basketball and be a like you're talking about, like being an athlete. And so it's pretty nifty that he was just like, well, maybe if I bring, just because this works for me and this is how I'm doing it, maybe I need to bring it down to something that he can relate to instead. And so that's really like beautifully put, because sometimes, it's really easy for me to say like, hey, if you guys would drink like 14 ounces of water per day, then you would feel better. And that's what works for me. And if you don't do that, well, then you're an idiot, And so, and I feel like that kind of same thing happens in music, whatever. It's like, just because like this type of way is like really reaching somebody and it really helped them like get to a certain goal, that's not always how it's going to work for everybody, because it's a different journey. And I really appreciate the fact that he decided to play basketball with you. It sounds like more than once too. because like you're saying, like that's what you need. And sometimes I feel like sometimes you have to get out of there, because like music can be, and I personally can understand that and relate that, because learning all this music theory now at like an older age feels like a tremendous, like everything's an uphill battle, and it's just like a daunting task, because you feel like you're playing catch up, and it's like being stressed out at any age. Then you're not really getting the music, you're not really getting the art, you're just like stressed out, and it's like there's like that ebb and that flow, you know. It's like yeah, that's really awesome that he was playing with you though.
Feel that way about technology, like trying to now in my tender old age learn more, you know, and get more into like gear and shaping a sound, using like my interface and a Neve DI that I just bought, and just like trying to educate myself with tech. But again, it's like an uphill battle because there's so much to learn and to discern. If I could, I just want to share maybe one or two stories as well. They're
Absolutely.
pretty short. So one memory I have is from SJW. One of the first memories with basically I had a piano teacher who was a teacher at Stanford, Glenn Spencer, who actually was one of Taylor Eichstein's first teachers as well. We had the same piano teacher there, God rest him, Glenn Spencer. But he recommended to me to go see a show at Dinkelspiel Auditorium here at Stanford. And it was one of the most incredible, impactful experiences of my life. I saw this amazing drummer, Billy Cobham, and you know, I'm sure everyone knows who he is. And he was playing alongside Zakir Hussain, an amazing tabla player. And it was just like, for being like a 12-year-old kid and not really, you know, I guess I had seen the Beach Boys too, like the same year, like a year or two before.
Wow.
And then I was like, oh, you know, I got to see like some of the most incredible drum percussion musicians ever to bless this earth play together. So that really, really blew my mind. Another cool experience, another memory I have from Stanford actually is being like a 14, 15-year-old kid hanging out with my girlfriend at the time, my high school sweetheart, and right before a show at Dinkelspiel, hanging out with Joe Henderson and just you know, smoking some pot before he went on for a set and just shooting the shit. And that just to me like was so cool that I could be able to connect as a 14-year-old kid with one of these amazing legends, you know, that we all look up to. So yeah. And then thirdly, I'll just one more. I did a show with Peter actually back in 2006 when I went back to finish my degree at Berkeley, and we got a chance to hang and play with Bob Moses, who you know, everyone should know who Bob Moses is. He's on Pat Metheny's first record with Jocko, and just spending a weekend with him, right, Peter? Wasn't that amazing? I mean, I got so much from that experience and his whole methodology, how he viewed music, and you know, just him sharing stories with us, and like just yeah, I learned so much from that experience, just hanging and making music with him. So,
You know, there was a thing that Bob did. We were playing something and it was fast, and I think you and I were both like straining, you know. and Bob and Bob Bob just stopped and he was like, no, hold on, and he just gave us a fucking rhythm masterclass, man. He taught us to feel the one, and then to feel the one and the three, and to feel that as like the ground. And then
those tempos, yeah, those up tempos.
Yeah, and then all the other subdivisions are within that, right?
Oh
But if you
God.
got a tempo that's going ding 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 and you're like,
It's almost like looking at it in like
I was
in
like,
an
my
Indian
leg is
classical
going like,
perspective. Yeah.
and I'm like, yeah, and he goes, no, it's not ding 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 ding.
No, right.
Like it's bung, bung, bung.
Right.
And then he starts stepping left, right, and he's like, just relax, man, take a breath. And it's like, and he made us like put down our instruments and come like and walk with him, and we're like stepping left, right, and then he's like, okay.
Yes, I remember that. Yes.
And then there's like, you know, he's like, yeah, my hi-hat sometimes going, that's okay, right? That's okay. It's in here, right? Is it bang down doom bang the gang doom take it gang
Yeah.
and he's like scatting and he's just so relaxed and I man that hit super deep for me, so deep. I mean and like that's some mentor shit right there too. That's some deep wise humanistic kind of shit, because it would be real easy for a cat of his stature playing with a couple of guys like us who are like late 20s, whatever, and and we can't play fast, and we're trying to for whatever because we still have something to prove, I guess. And and for him to just be like in his head like, this fucking sucks, I can't believe I'm doing this gig. Why am I doing this? I played with Pat Metheny, these fucking idiots like think they're good. Like, yeah, this guy has a famous father. He thinks he can play, I mean, dude, there are so many places he could go, right? Energetically, mentally, emotionally. And he didn't do any of that. He came out and like brought us into beautiful embodied knowledge and practice in music. You know who also did that for us, Lukash, is Yosvani, man. It's funny. Terry brought us under his wing in our early 20s at the Stanford Jazz Workshop. Man, we might have been 19.
Yosvani, Daphnis.
Yeah. And he, he like, we just showed up at their rehearsals because I think Jim said, you should go check these guys out, and we just showed up, man. We didn't know them. And we're just like long-haired first year, second year Berkeley kids. Like, we thought we were kind of hot shit. And these cats were fucking destroying the earth, scorching the earth with their music. And like, they had no reason to bring us under their wing with the generosity that they did. And talk about being humans. Like, they brought us into their world. They brought us to Santa Cruz and brought us to the boardwalk.
Dude, I learned how to roll joints on that trip when we went to Santa Cruz. That was
incredible
amazing
experiences. Yes, there was a lot of pot back then.
A lot of pot, a lot of Cuba Libres.
Yeah. But like, just the human connection of it was what it was all about. And the music, the patience with me musically that Yosvani showed. Unbelievable patience. He was trying to explain to me how he felt these like Steve Coleman rhythms and his own compositional stuff. And I was like struggling. I could not feel these crazy odd meters and whatnot, and he broke it down to like longs and shorts, threes and twos, basically. And it just unlocked, once it clicked for me, it unlocked a whole aspect of the matrix of music that it was like fucking serious level up moment musically, where it was like now you have all these other capabilities in your avatar.
Yes, you have leveled up now,
dude. Yeah. And really, like, it's when I think about what he did, he was coming from Cuba. He could have had a chip on his shoulder. He could have been very nervous to be hanging out with a couple of like kids, like, who the fuck are these guys? And or just standoffish or judgmental or anything, man. But he was so generous, and to this day,
you're a good
man,
dude. You're a good dude. That's why I was wanting to hang out with you, because you're a good dude.
I'm a better dude because of people like him, and because of his influence. He people like him made me a better person. And I think that's the most important aspect of mentorship, and that really cycles us back around, you know, to where we started with this. But yeah, man.
Yeah, man. I want to just give a couple of honorable mentions to Ed Kelly and Khalil Shaheed, two cats who aren't with us anymore, but were highly influential for me. Khalil, there's on Washington and 12th Street maybe in Oakland, somewhere around there is a hotel that he used to have a gig at, and I was too young to actually be in this particular bar area of the hotel, but he would let me sit in, man, and it was like I was a kid, you know, I was just still a junior in high school, and I'll never forget his mentorship. I mean, introduced me to the guys that I still play with today, like Ambrose and Jonathan Finlayson, and his stepdaughter Savannah Harris, who I still see around here in New York. And anyway, and Ed Kelly, who just opened up his room on Tuesdays and Thursdays at Laney College. He had a jazz class, and it just left this door open. It happened to be on the, very close to the street. So, the door was open. Anyone could walk in, and
They hear,
yeah, just by word of mouth on the bus one day, I ran into this guy. I don't know if you know Paris King. I don't know if you met him and his brother John King. Anyway, he was like, "Yeah, there's this class on, the guy just leaves," and I that's the only reason I ever heard of him. Was I ran into some guy on the bus who told me the door was open, and I wanted to learn jazz, and then that was a complete change in direction and such an open door to a community I definitely wouldn't have known otherwise. And Ed, he would just call tunes, and he never said, he probably said 20 words at most the whole 2 or 3 hours class. He didn't say much. It was really just his presence and being there, and being supportive, and then I'll never forget the feeling I had when it was like coming home from college, like from Berkeley on the summer or something like that. He called me for a gig, and it was just one of the highest honors that I could have ever had, so anyway, yeah, man.
Wow. Talking about Berkeley and just like having, saying a few words from that session at Laney College. I remember George Garzone's free ensemble going into that. It's like there were no words. He just turned off the lights and away we went. That was it.
I got something. I was not going to say it, but when Peter, you were talking earlier, I thought of George. Now, I studied with 2 semesters with George, but the lesson that I'm thinking of wasn't a lesson I was given. Do you guys remember Alain Millet? He's a great pianist in Boston. Mother father, if you will. Anyway, he was in George's, that same ensemble. I never took that ensemble with George. I wish I did, but he was in that same ensemble with George. And one day George was late, and Alain kind of, he said he was like, it's probably damn true because he's a motherfucker, but he was like one of the, he was like probably the best kid in the class because he was really a motherfucker. And he was, he was really there to kind of get George's knowledge. And one day George was late, and then he was, it was kind of, so they started playing before he got there, and like it just wasn't happening, right? And then George came in, and then the band sounded fucking killing. And that was the lesson.
Where's that happen?
That was the lesson. He was like, you can't be just about you playing good. You got to make others around you play their best. And man, when that was one of the biggest doors swung open of learning about this music, was that Alain Millet telling me in my own lesson that he was giving me about that time he was in George's ensemble, So, and that just really puts your whole mindset in a different frame. It puts your it frames your whole mind in a different way when you're approaching playing with other people, like to be that kind of person that can really bring out the best in everyone. That means if it gets off, you're listening. You're not being like, this is where it's at, motherfucker. Or
that's when the best stuff happens, right? When you silence.
Yeah.
Listen.
Yeah. And but also the actual compassion and caring about the moment, the music that's happening right there in front of you, and not judging. I mean, some people know. How many people we've talked to who don't know very much English? Maybe they only know 800 words, whatever it is, going along that same theory. But we can still have the deepest of conversations. It's not about how much you know. It's really about what you say. And for me, the biggest lesson I keep learning, and this one I can't specifically remember, maybe from Hal Crook, I'm guessing, but, splitting up the music into what and how has always been super, super important to me. Not Hal Crook, Hal, HLW. And again, all the technical theory stuff, that's the what. That's the and that's.
And
But
how you say it.
It's always about how you say what you say that really communicates. Again, so that's and just I think we all are naturally going to be that kind of person, but we'll just have to make sure we're the same kind of cats that taught us. That came be free with our knowledge and being willing to share the language because
Right. How do we express that? How do we share all that, those moments, those hours and hours of, and like these days too, especially like people are looking for like these easy ways to kind of, go about it. And, like, and there's a lot of resources online for younger generation students of music to really kind of pick things apart. It's like, how do we, as music educators, really give them the best kind of overall representation without being too like convoluted, being able to present the complexity without being too wordy or whatever. I don't know. That's something I've been thinking about again, just, trying to work on these concepts for these books. And it's like, all right, like, there's been a million books on this one thing. Like, I don't want to, definitely not try to reinvent the wheel here, but how do we, share, this experience and in a musical format? And so how can we better resonate with our fellow human beings, and just pass on this knowledge?
Well, I think you're doing it, man. I mean, it's just take in as much as you can. I mean, well, we all have to make a mental map of how we see music, and just sharing that authentically how you see it in your particular perspective, and being honest about it, and just being sure that it's clear. That's it. Doesn't really I don't think should be any more than that. I think, and you're doing it,
Oh, God bless you, brother.
Mr. LV.
How are you?
Yeah.
Well, shoot, Peter, Mr. PhD over there.
Yeah, I mean,
he's I'm just trying to catch up to him.
Hey,
trust me, he's a doctor. Okay.
Of course.
I need to probably wrap up. So, but I'd like to give the floor back to Cameron, man. You got any kind of concluding thoughts, bring us full circle, or riff on what's been said?
Yeah, I think it's sure. I think it's just really you're saying like it's important to really kind of like find your own kind of journey, and I think finding other people that are like willing to be open is really important. There's two gentlemen that I actually, because most of my heroes are unfortunately dead many years before my own bringing up. That Jim Petticord, who actually convinced the bass player of Journey to not quit music back when they were in high school or college together. Yeah. And so he influenced, and so the guy was like, man, I the name is escaping me, but I know it was the bass player from Journey because they were both playing bass and he played predominantly trombone. And when he was the first gentleman to let me play gigs or whatever. And so that was really important and influential on my own playing, because he never told me like how to play. He never told me what to play. He just gave me like, all right, these are the tunes that we're going to play. And and it didn't really matter. Like I could play something really hot or like something like really growly or whatever and stuff like that. And he let me into their big band that he was conducting at the time, and it was just really important because he never was like, no, that doesn't work. It was always just like, yeah, do whatever your thing is. And I think that's kind of important as well. It's like, it wasn't like trying to influence, like he influenced me through like continue to keep going, and like he kind of helped me like when I was younger, like reading the room, whatever. Because I'd play like I'd play a lot of dance gigs with him, and I'd be sitting there. I'm like, okay, like, and we had a set list that I always called the menu because we never really played it, and it was just like, and we'd switch, like we had like 200-300 tunes in this big man chart in there, and we had to like rip through the back of the thing and sight read like on the gig, which was like, I was like, God, I don't know these tunes. Like some of the other stuff I just wasn't really familiar with, and that was really influential. But it was also like reading a crowd to be able to give them like he could feel and read the energy, and that was really important for me to kind of figure out with my own bands, and to figure out when I'm playing with other groups, even with Lukash, like, okay, we just play this one song. The next song is a feature that I'm going to be playing on. What was the crowd just like amped on? Like, where were they vibing at? And what can I do to either continue to keep that or raise it or lower that down? Like, not lower their vibe, but like, where do they need to go to like feel like satisfied at the end of the concert? Being like, that was something that I really remember. And I think having those inspirations can really help, like, get you to feel that. And as well as like not hampering with the progress. Cause I think a lot of us are just too stickler on ourselves, or, too anal on ourselves. And that kind of binds us up. And when you have somebody that's kind of like, no, it's cool. Like, you are where you're at, but you're going to keep growing. And I think that's really important to have. Yeah.
Yeah, we are where we are.
Yeah.
I mean, and there was no problem today. There's no problem today, which is beautiful. By the way, I don't know if you guys caught that, but
I almost went there with technology all the way into capitalism.
No.
I stopped before I put the gate up.
We were talking about solutions today. The solution is
right. Exactly. Juxtaposed next to.
yeah.
Oh.
Awesome, Kamrin. I really appreciate you hanging out with us, man.
Yeah,
Thank
absolutely. Yeah, thank you guys for having me. I'm pretty jealous that you get to play on Illinois Jackett's horn and stuff like that.
Oh,
He was probably,
and
you got to meet him. Like, oh my gosh.
It was unforgettable.
I bet that
Afternoon.
And he was probably playing like his Super Action 80 at that point, right? It's like triple gold plate. Yeah,
Indeed.
I thought so, because the age referenced, because by that point his balance action had been stolen.
Oh goodness, I didn't know. Oh goodness, I didn't know that happened. Lord have mercy.
Yeah. Selmer gave him a triple gold plated one. It said Illinois Jacket in the bell.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's weird, man. I didn't know. Okay, so I was the only one, still am the only one I know that plays the Super Action A. So that's
really
what we're geeking out on. This one is not, but my favorite horn that my grandfather bought me is a Super Action. I don't know. We're getting into it.
Saxophone nerding out.
I had to
I'm
know
gonna get
that.
off this call and leave you two on it, and then anybody else, any saxophone mega nerds who want to hang out and watch you guys.
We have a 4-hour mouthpiece conversation.
I'm just giving you shit. It's awesome.
No.
And Kamrin, how old are you, dude?
I'm 23.
Okay.
23. Your knowledge of the narrative history, the lineage that has been kind of that you feel connected to is really, it's very powerful, man. And I think I don't know. I just want to acknowledge that, man, and say, kudos to you for like learning the stories of the history, for learning about the people that you admire, and not just like trying to grab some music, musical tidbits here and there, but really, that shows a deep respect for all aspects of the music. And it's something that I really admire, that I've never been great at. And so just way to go, man.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thanks for having me on, guys. One thing I really want to do is, I'm sort of doing it for my own, like, because I enjoy it, but I also, I really want to get like the music down and having like the oral history and other stuff like that, so that I can give to the next generation. So these heroes that impacted me can impact the next generation as well. So there can be another Herschel Evans that helps give another suit to another Lester Young of a different style, and so that continues to grow, because we just don't hear about stuff like that. And that's really what makes the music even more like wonderful, because it's not just a conversation between the two. It's like there's so many more contexts, and that makes it so like deeper. It's almost like it's like a religion that we can all like subscribe to or whatever.
The best kind of religion. No judgment.
Yeah.
Really. Wow.
Yeah, maybe someday you'll be that guy, man.
Yeah. Yeah.
For real. I just finished with a quick story, man.
Yeah.
I went to Interlochen Arts Camp when I was 16. And it was the first time I'd gone to a music camp instead of a baseball camp. And it completely changed my life. And one of the things that happened there, among many, was that Donald Vega is an incredible jazz pianist.
I know Donald, yeah.
El Gato, we called him back
Oh,
then.
okay. Yeah.
Donald's fucking bad motherfucker.
Yeah.
He was like the top pianist, and I was like the bottom pianist. There were three of us. I want to say the guy above me was Arwan Ortiz.
Oh yeah.
Do you know who Arwan is?
I know Arwan, yeah. Or I can never pronounce his name correctly, but yeah.
I think that's who it was. Anyway, he was super cool with me, super patient. But Donald was like so intimidating. Not personally, but just because I watched him play like one of the first weeks, and we were there for 8 weeks, and I was just like, oh fuck. This cat sounds like McCoy Tyner and Mulgrew Miller rolled into one, and he's so fucking bad. And I'm like so puny compared to this. And I was small too, I was like just hitting puberty basically. Like, I was a super late bloomer. And anyway, I just was so intimidated. And I'm so one day I'm walking by the practice sheds, and I hear this like monstrous jazz piano being played, and I'm like, oh my God. And it's like a magnet, I wasn't thinking or anything. I just had to go to that shed. And I'm like standing there like outside the windows over here, and I'm just like listening and like peeking my head over, just like, oh my God. And he looks back and sees me, and I'm just like, heart pounding. I realize he's seen me, and he opens the door, and he's like, the sweetest cat, man. He just had like love radiating from him, and he goes like, hey man, come on in. And he had me sit down next to him, and he just like showed me how he was practicing, and like how he was going through the real book and reading tunes, and like, and I don't know, I kind of blacked out. I don't even remember exactly what we did or what he had me do, but I never ever forget. Talk about giving somebody, I was talking about McKinley gave me that fire, right? Donald gave me something so meaningful in that one interaction, man. Just like love and acceptance, and like this deep love for the music that he just was emanating, and he just like transmitted it to me, man, with so much generosity. It was incredible. And it moves me to tears to this day, man. And when I think about like wanting to, give what's been given to you, that moment is one that is formative for me, for sure.
And so good. It's too good.
Maybe we'll stop there.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah,
sure.
Peter. Beautiful.
Yeah.
All right, y'all. Well, hey, it's a pleasure to have you on, Kamrin.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for having me.
And cats, see you again next week.
Indeed. All right.
Definitely.
Adios.
Okay.
Take care.
Amigos.